LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 5th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 14 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I will have a couple political comedy sources from last night's Saturday Night Live Weekend Update, and also Bill Maher's monologue on Real Time on HBO last Friday. Nothing from the cold open. I was a little disappointed. They went non-political, Avengers versus Game of Thrones for Saturday Night Live's cold open, so no clips from that. But they did cover my main topic about Attorney General William Barr lying to Congress and Trump denying the whole Russia meddling in the election thing with his call with Vladimir Putin, not bringing it up, and the no collusion, no obstruction mantra that seems to be falling apart if you're really paying attention. But if you're not really paying attention, it's a good talking point for the pro-Trump forces. And so the Barr lie, when he testified, Attorney General William Barr, his lies and Trump's denials. That's the main topic. I also have Bernie Sanders talking about actual issues that people might care about, not having to do with Trump scandals, and also about democratic socialism. That'll be the last clip at the end. But I want to start with Saturday Night Live covering both the William Barr testimony and also the thing I like about this Weekend Update clip is it shows the entire Donald Trump quote about his conversation with Vladimir Putin about the Mueller report, where he claims to have heard Vladimir Putin smiling through the phone, which you actually did not see get covered on the corporate news outlets. They didn't show that whole quote, but you get it all in this 100-second clip from Weekend Update. I actually edited together two Colin Jost jokes that I thought were good, or segments that were good, over in this clip.
Well, this Thursday in Congress was Take Your Chicken to Work Day. What happened was Attorney General William Barr refused to show up for a congressional hearing because I guess our country just has no rules anymore. So Democrat Steve Cohen brought in a prop chicken and a bucket of KFC to make the hilarious and subtle point that Barr is a chicken. Yeah, it was awful. And you know who really hated it? The other people in the room who had to smell and watch an old man go to town on a bucket of chicken at 9 in the morning. And just think about the poor intern who had to go find a KFC at dawn and order a 12-piece bucket and then be like, oh, no, it's for my boss. He's a congressman. And then yesterday, President Trump called Vladimir Putin and discussed the Mueller report. And here's how Trump described the call.
We discussed it. He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse.
I gotta say, I don't know if that metaphor is more confusing in Russian or in Trump's English. Also, can we just hear that first part again?
He actually sort of smiled.
He smiled through the phone? Man. But just to sum up the state of our country right now, our president is hearing smiles, our Congress is talking to chickens, and the thing people seem angriest about is that Sonic the Hedgehog has human teeth.
My daughter was really into the whole Sonic the Hedgehog trailer controversy. I not ever really played any Sonic the Hedgehog games and have no emotional investment in that whole controversy. But Trump being able to hear Putin smile through the phone, and I saw one commentator, I can't remember, on Facebook or Twitter, also pointing out that that conversation took place through two translators. So Trump could hear Putin smile through the phone through two translators. That's pretty ridiculous. And kudos to Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update for pointing that out when none of the actual news shows that I'm going to take clips from pointed out the whole smile through the phone controversy. But Bill Maher, talking about Bill Barr, the Attorney General, in his monologue, I think made a couple good jokes and also pointed out sort of the absurdity of the Attorney General being the top law enforcement officer in the United States and then also basically committing a crime, and there's really not that much you can do about it, as we'll talk about some more in the following clips, but you can see Bill Maher make fun of Bill Barr in the 90 seconds of his monologue that I wanted to share with you. And as usual, by the way, down in the video description, you can see the source of all the clips, including the full Saturday Night Live clip, the full Bill Maher monologue, also my clip list. There's a link down there to my 14 clips with the notes that I use that you may or may not be able to understand, but at least should let you know the topic and who's speaking in the clip and maybe generally what they're speaking about. And anyway, if you read here, it says Bill Maher, Barr testimony, lie monologue, jokes. Over here.
I'm telling you, if America was a summer blockbuster, it would be called Democracy Endgame. And if you missed the earlier installments in this franchise, started with Russia interfered. This is the, nobody disagrees with this in the Mueller report. Russia interfered with our election in 2016. That was the finding of that report. And this week we found out that Robert Mueller wrote more than one letter to the Attorney General, wink, wink, William Barr, saying, why did you mischaracterize what I wrote? And Barr responded, well, the report was my baby. My baby? I thought Republicans were against killing babies. This Bill Barr is so far up Trump's ass, he bumped into Hannity. So Barr went before the Senate this week on Wednesday, and the Democrats looked all so happy after it was over that they gave him a good grilling. I think they're missing the big picture. Trump is still president. And the big gotcha was they got Barr to commit perjury, which apparently is some old-timey law about lying being wrong. You know, Nancy Pelosi said, that's a crime, and I'm going to report it to, oh, yeah.
So yeah, that is one of the conundrums of having the Trump administration be a criminal administration. There's a good Washington Post editorial that I haven't put a link down to in the video description about how the Trump administration is now a criminal administration. And when the Attorney General is acting like the president's lawyer and not the top law enforcement officer in the United States, and there actually is an inherent power that the House has to, and that's going to come up in a clip I'll show later, where they can actually jail people. There's a jail in the House of Representatives building, and they can send out the sergeant at arms and hold people who, you'll see this when I show the discussion between Chris Wallace and Democratic Representative Cicilline, but that is way down the line. That is clip number 9. The first clip I want to show is the news summary. I think is the best news summary, closest. I came into the weekend thinking that my title for the video or main topic was going to be Barr lies, Trump denies, and this news summary almost got me to change it to like impeach Barr, comma Trump, or maybe just impeach Trump, and that's the whole basis of this news summary here from NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd does his little intro and then goes to the pre-recorded package about how Americans have like a hung jury on impeachment. It's like 48-49, and they go into all these poll numbers, and Democrats are split, and they finish up with the whole Mueller report discussed in the call with Vladimir Putin controversy, and they don't show that whole Trump smiling through the phone thing, or Putin smiling through the phone at Trump. But other than that, a good news summary that I'll talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
When it comes to how Americans view the Mueller investigation, perhaps our longtime NBC News Democratic pollster Peter Hart put it best. It's a hung jury. People say President Trump is not guilty, but he's not innocent either. In our new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 49% of Americans say Congress should either begin impeachment hearings now or keep investigating to see if impeachment is necessary in the future. While an almost equal 48% say no impeachment hearings should be held at all. As you might imagine, Democrats and Republicans describe their impressions of President Trump based on the Mueller report in starkly different terms. In interviews, Democrats mostly use words like Russia, guilty, obstruction, impeach, and criminal. Republicans, on the other hand, sound like Mr. Trump. Witch hunt, no collusion, and president are the most commonly used words. For independents, just one word stood out to us: Russia. Still, as you'll see in a moment, even Democrats are split on impeachment. As for President Trump, his approval rating is right where it's been. 46% approve of his performance. That's up 3 points from last month. 51% disapproving. But look at this. Over the past 11 months, with one small exception, Mr. Trump's approval rating in our poll has sat consistently between 43 and 46%. In short, for all of the teasing Mueller headlines, presidential tweets, and congressional hearings, Americans have landed right where they started with this president, clinging to their established point of view about him. All of which has left Democrats and their 18 to 21 presidential candidates, depending on who's doing the counting, asking the same question Robert Redford asked at the end of the great movie, The Candidate. What do we do now?
It is important that the House step up to its constitutional duty and start impeachment proceedings.
Impeachment is never off the table, but should we start there? I don't agree with that.
Democrats remain divided on whether and when to begin impeachment proceedings.
We must get behind the House of Representatives as they pursue impeachment for this president.
The idea of us pursuing impeachment when we know it is a two-step process makes no sense at all.
In a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, just 30% of Democrats, 19% of independents, and 3% of Republicans say there is enough evidence to begin impeachment hearings now. A full 50% of Democrats say Congress should continue investigating to see if there is enough evidence to hold hearings down the road. And top Democrats are listening.
The path of investigation.
Continue to do the investigation.
Investigations. You got to investigate.
There's reason to further investigate it.
But it's not clear how long House Speaker Nancy Pelosi can hold back her members.
And I say to the American people, did you elect a king, or did you elect a president?
For now, Democrats have found a common enemy in Attorney General Bill Barr.
I do think he should resign.
He should resign.
Do you think the Attorney General should resign?
Yes, I do.
That's after this exchange last month, when Barr was asked about reports that the special counsel's team was frustrated with how he had described their findings.
Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't. I suspect that they probably wanted, more put out.
In fact, Barr had received a letter from Robert Mueller days earlier expressing his concerns.
The Attorney General of the United States of America was not telling the truth to the Congress of the United States. That's a crime.
Now Democrats are demanding to see Mueller's unredacted report by tomorrow morning.
If we don't get that, we will proceed to hold the Attorney General in contempt.
All I can say to my Democrat colleagues, you got the House. The way you run it will determine a lot about what happens in 2020. Knock yourself out.
Meanwhile, President Trump is threatening to prevent former White House counsel Don McGahn from appearing.
I don't think I can let him and then tell everybody else you can't, because especially him, because he was a counsel.
So is it done?
I would say it's done.
On Friday, in a phone call the Russians say lasted 90 minutes, President Trump tweeted that he discussed the, quote, Russian hoax with Vladimir Putin.
He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse.
Did you ask him not to medal in the next election?
We didn't discuss that.
Joining me now is the latest Democrat to get into the presidential.
Actually does have the mountain mouse smile through the phone clip in there at the very end. But they never really discussed it on any of the news shows, but whatever. I guess I'd forgotten that clip was in there, but the other thing that they laid out really well in the Meet the Press news summary there was the way that Barr had previously lied to Senator Charlie, or to Charlie Crist and to Chris Van Hollen. I don't think they showed the Chris Van Hollen clip, but that'll come up later. When he basically, to keep the Trump spin on the Mueller report going for all the way up until Easter, Barr basically lied about getting this letter from Robert Mueller on March 27th, like a few days after his 4-page summary, saying that he was misrepresenting the report or not giving the full context, content, and whatever. You'll see it again in a later clip. But like I said, that was the best of the news summaries, and even the one criticism I have was apparently invalid. But the next news clip, I think, or news summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, suffers from this bias that I find a lot of weeks on the news programs, where they think that the news story where they have the exclusive guest is the most important news story. And sometimes it may be that they're covering stories more than, like this whole Mueller report. Maybe is it getting overcovered? It seems there's a hung jury based on the polls you just saw in that last news summary. But you'll see these next couple news summaries focus more on foreign policy, and then the ABC one focuses on the Democratic race because they have their exclusive interview with Bernie Sanders, which is the final clip I'm showing, which has nothing to do with the Mueller report. It shows how Democrats have issues they need to focus on, and then I edit in some discussion of democratic socialism, which is always fun. But here is the news summary that sets that up, which is more about the Democrats and then the foreign policy challenges, maybe because the two guests are Bernie Sanders and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and so that's kind of a corporate news bias to cover the stories on which you have guests. Oh, and you'll see that in this clip, and I'll show you some more of that after we watch this clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It's been a big week on the campaign trail as Joe Biden is in and already ahead of the pack, reshaping the 2020 campaign. But Bernie Sanders is not far behind and portraying himself as the true progressive in the race. And Sanders isn't shy about taking aim at Joe Biden's record. We caught up with Sanders in Iowa, where he received a rock star welcome at the Des Moines Farmers Market.
Make us proud.
Thank you, I will. Thank you.
Bernie,
thank you.
Okay.
Bernie!
We'll have that exclusive interview shortly, but we begin with what's been a challenging week in American foreign policy. Over the weekend, new provocations from North Korea, as Kim Jong-un personally oversaw the country's most significant military tests in over a year, launching a barrage of projectiles into the Sea of Japan. And while the U.S. has yet to confirm the type of projectile tested, the move raises questions about Kim Jong-un's willingness to negotiate a nuclear deal with President Trump. And here in this hemisphere, a failed uprising in Venezuela. The Trump administration recognized Venezuela's interim president, opposition leader Juan Guaido, over 3 months ago, and has actively encouraged Guaido's challenge to President Nicolas Maduro, this week urging members of Maduro's inner circle to defect. But after Guaido's call for a military uprising, Maduro is still in power. Let's get right to it all with Secretary of State Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining.
So, like I said, you get the bias there based on the Bernie Sanders and Mike Pompeo, and I advertised that Bernie Sanders and Mike Pompeo would be the subject of clips that I am showing in the title of my video, and I have multiple Mike Pompeo clips and one, like I said, 2 Bernie Sanders clips edited together for the final news clip at the end, clip 14. Did you see they called him a progressive rock star? I don't know. Is that pumping up their interview subject? That seems a little... Now, I'm actually someone who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries in the last election cycle. I haven't made up my mind as to what candidate I support in this election cycle, but you'll see the Democrats and foreign policy is also the subject mostly of this Jake Tapper news summary, and also the good economy. Unemployment down to 3.6%, more jobs in the last month created, 265,000 jobs created in the last month, more than expected. if Trump didn't have this good economy, his job approval ratings would probably be down like 10 or 20 points lower. And it's amazing that he has such low job approval ratings given the strong economy. And Jake Tapper, I guess, got sick of Kellyanne Conway calling him biased or Trump calling CNN fake news, and so he wants to be proud or to make sure he gives full emphasis to the good economic news for the Trump administration right at the beginning of this clip. And they talk about it more in other parts of the show I didn't take clips from, but I want to point that out and talk a little more about this news summary from CNN State of the Union. The good economic news, it's, what is it? The State of Our Union is double vision, is that what it is? No, Seeing Double, sorry. Isn't that a Foreigner song? Seeing Double, not Double Vision is the Foreigner song. Seeing Double with the good economic news, but problems in foreign policy that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that brief news summary from CNN State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of Our Union is seeing double. President Trump is in Washington this morning dealing with two political realities. On the domestic front, the president and the U.S. got excellent economic news Friday. Unemployment hit 3.6%. That's the lowest since 1969. But President Trump remains quite unpopular with the American people at large. And on the world stage, he's on defense over his relationship with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un after North Korea launched multiple test missiles on Saturday. The president is also facing criticism over an hour-long phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which the president says he discussed the Mueller report, but not Russian election interference. And the president contradicted his top foreign policy officials by restating Putin's claim that Russia is not involved in Venezuela as if it's a fact. All of this is setting up a difficult dynamic for Democrats as they take on the president in 2020. Is it the economy, stupid, as the old James Carville trope goes, or in the era of Trump, will the election be decided on other factors? This morning, we're going to bring to you two exclusive interviews with 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. We went to Newark, New Jersey for a special sit-down with Senator Cory Booker in his home city and state. But I want to begin with 2020 presidential candidate and Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar joining me.
I actually don't have any Amy Klobuchar clips, although I have one Cory Booker clip coming up. But you saw how Jake Tapper there dealt with the good economy and then the foreign policy challenges. And then notice the news summary there about the Trump call with Putin, I didn't mention the whole smiling through the phone controversy, but the other main controversies, that he said that he talked about the Russian hoax. Trump said he talked about the Russia hoax with Putin, but never brought up the Russian meddling in the election. And then the whole thing about restating Putin's claim not to be involved in Venezuela, which contradicts what everyone else in the Trump administration, like National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I'll show Mike Pompeo responding to that in just a bit. But I wanted to point out the way Jake Tapper and CNN summarized that Trump-Putin phone call to contrast it with the longer news summary from Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace starts off with basically the same template of good economic news but foreign policy rough spots, and then brings it over to Kevin Corke, who expands on that theme. But notice how Kevin Corke here summarizes the same Trump-Putin phone call, never mentioning the restating Putin's lie about Venezuela, never mentioning the whole controversy over failing to bring up the Russian meddling in the 2016 election and not to meddle in the 2020 election. Anyway, that's the Fox News summary that I've kind of pre-criticized and will now watch with you and talk a little more with you about after we watch together here.
Fox News in Washington. President Trump got some good economic news this week, but it's been a rough patch for Trump foreign policy. First, the failed uprising in Venezuela. As opposition leader, Juan Guaido was unable to get the military to overthrow disputed President Nicolas Maduro. Then reports North Korea fired several short-range projectiles, raising tensions between Washington and Pyongyang. And Russian President Putin in the middle, challenging the U.S. on both fronts. In a moment, we'll discuss all this with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. But first, let's get the latest from Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin.
Chris, it remains unclear exactly what the administration will do in terms of strategy as it ponders how to tackle those simmering hotspots around the globe that you mentioned. But what is clear is each comes with a great sense of urgency.
North Korea's state media showing Kim Jong-un looking through binoculars, observing what it says is the firing of long-range rocket launchers and what appeared to be a short-range ballistic missile. The provocation comes amid a new rift in the repressive government's diplomatic relationship with the U.S. Just last week, Chairman Kim held a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who also appeared to undermine American foreign policy in Venezuela by backing embattled President Nicolas Maduro. A plan to oust Maduro appeared to fizzle out this week as opposition leader Juan Guaido continued to garner the vocal support of both the Trump administration and that of millions of his countrymen who have seen their once prosperous economy fall desperately into ruin. And while Guaido told the Washington Post that he underestimated Maduro's support within the military, he promised to continue his fight to wrest control of the country from the dictator, hopefully, he said, with the support of the U.S. President Trump, meanwhile, had what he described as a very good conversation with the president of Russia this week, the two men discussing a number of topics, among them trade, nuclear proliferation, as well as the ongoing crisis in Caracas.
And speaking of Caracas, Guaido told the Washington Post he expects a groundswell of defections in the military to ultimately force Maduro from power. We'll see if that actually happens. He also said, Chris, he wouldn't rule out U.S. military assistance alongside Venezuelan forces to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. Chris?
Kevin Corke.
So that news summary was both longer and more detailed, but also left out significant anti-Trump information. As I said before I showed it, I kind of criticized that clip. And before I finished with the news summaries, I was looking at the live comments and saw these super chat contributions so far, which I really appreciate. Here you go. So to answer first Christmas question there about emoluments, since I wanted to answer that because they talked about the Mueller report and all those some of those news summaries. The Mueller investigation had a fairly narrow scope that was given it. It was basically Russian meddling in the 2016 election, the possibility of Trump campaign conspiracy with that meddling in the election, and any cases arising out of there or arising thereof. And so emoluments is, if you have your Constitution, there's the emoluments clause that says that the president can't accept any emoluments, which is basically money from foreign sources while he's president. And it's possible there are all these spin-off investigations from the Mueller investigation that were beyond his scope, that he sent to other districts. There's the thing about the Trump inaugural committee, and that might involve emoluments if there are foreign sources for that money. And who knows, there are like 12 investigations of the 14, 12 unknown investigations that might involve that kind of thing. But that's to answer Christmas question. Also, thanks Lulu Girl, and I saw in the live comments about your mom. I'm sorry to hear about your mom. My condolences on that. I'm glad to see you're still here watching the news and commentary this week. And now I want to get to the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo clips I promised. And the last clip I showed, I criticized Chris Wallace and Kevin Corke on Fox News Sunday for not mentioning the strange problems with Trump's conversation with Vladimir Putin. One, that he restated this false claim that Russia wasn't involved in the Venezuela crisis, and the other was that he said he mentioned the whole Russia hoax thing, but didn't bring up Russian meddling in our elections in a 60 to 90 minute phone call. Well, that actually both those issues were brought up on Fox News Sunday by Chris Wallace in his later interview with Mike Pompeo. I didn't take the Venezuela one because I had already recorded Jonathan Karl, the guest host of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, questioning Mike Pompeo on that same issue. Although I'll show Chris Wallace questioning Mike Pompeo about the Putin election meddling conversation, or lack of conversation. But first, here's ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, guest host Jonathan Karl, questioning Mike Pompeo about Trump's failure to toe the line of his own administration on Russian meddling in Venezuela, and see if you really buy his defense of his own boss over in this clip.
I want to play you what the president said about Vladimir Putin and what Putin told him about Venezuela.
He is not looking at all to get involved in Venezuela, other than he'd like to see something positive happen for Venezuela. And I feel the same way.
But wait a minute. What does he mean, the Russians, that Putin does not want to get involved in Venezuela? Aren't they already deeply involved in supporting Maduro?
The president has said that the Russians must get out. I'm going to meet with Foreign Minister Lavrov in a couple of days. We'll have more conversations about this. The objective is very clear. We want the Iranians out. We want the Russians out. We want the Cubans out. That's ultimately what has to take place in order for Venezuelan democracy to be restored. It's very clear. I don't think anything the president said is inconsistent with that.
But wait a minute. You said that that Maduro was on the plane ready to leave and to flee for Cuba, and it was the Russians that told him to stay. And the president is saying that Putin told him that he's not looking to get involved in Venezuela. Does the president not realize what you have said publicly and what is obvious, that Putin is deeply involved in Venezuela? I mean, what does he mean when he's saying he's not looking to get involved?
Yeah, I didn't see the full context of the quote there. I don't know what context that was said, and I do know this. The president has made clear we want everyone out, and that includes the Russians.
So you were at the Pentagon going over military options.
I can just imagine Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that you just saw he was like doing backflips to try to say there were no inconsistencies between what his boss said and what his boss Donald Trump said in his press availability, talking about his conversation with his buddy Vladimir Putin and what the administration has been saying for quite a while about Russian involvement in Venezuela. And I don't know, it's for some reason Trump can't say negative things about Vladimir Putin. They're just like best buds. I don't know what that's all about. One of the things that wasn't in the Mueller report, in addition to emoluments, was the whole counterintelligence investigation details that might come out in like the Senate Intelligence Committee investigator. Who knows but whether Trump is compromised by Russian loans or Russian compromat. Some people say the P tape, although most people think the so-called P tape doesn't exist, but there could be other things. I mean, we know that Putin knew that Trump was lying about having business in Russia when he was still trying to get the Trump Tower Moscow deal approved all the way through the election, and he was lying about it, and the Russian government and Putin knew about that, and that's sort of compromising material. That's one of the things we've already learned from the Mueller investigation, but the next clip I want to show is another example of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo doing backflips to pretend there are no inconsistencies in what his boss Donald Trump is saying. This is Chris Wallace cross-examining him in a fairly good fashion, except for one point at the beginning. You'll see that Chris Wallace says, well, the Mueller report says that there was no collusion. Trump has been cleared on collusion, which isn't true if you go back a couple weeks and watch my live stream where I talked about the actual results of the Mueller report, that there is plenty of evidence of collusion. There's just not proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a criminal conspiracy with the Russians. And there are a couple people in the Trump campaign who definitely colluded in the dissemination of the hacked DNC and DCC and Hillary Clinton campaign emails. That's just not a crime if you aren't involved in the conspiracy with the hacking. So there's plenty of evidence of collusion, which Chris Wallace, as the so-called straight news anchor of Fox News Sunday should not be saying there's no collusion, which he does, but otherwise does a good job of cross-examining Mike Pompeo about what Trump said regarding election meddling and Vladimir Putin, and Mike Pompeo's response is pretty weak, as I'll discuss with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
The Mueller report that came out has completely cleared the president when it comes to collusion with the Russians in the 2016 election. As for the Kremlin, however, it said this: the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. But here's how President Trump described his talk with Putin on Friday about 2016 and about possible meddling in 2020. Take a look.
He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse.
Did you tell him not to meddle in the next election?
We didn't discuss that. Really, we didn't discuss it.
Why doesn't the president get tough with Putin about what everyone seems to agree is clear, meddling in 2016 and the threat of meddling in 2020?
Chris, this administration has been tougher on Russia than any of its predecessor administrations. I could go through the list, but there's not time in the show to talk about all the things we've done. Our largest defense buildup, our new, I mean, the list is long, Chris. And so for you to suggest that somehow we haven't taken election interference seriously, we do. We continue to work on it. We continue to make sure that every election is as safe as it can possibly be. The Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence agencies, all working to not only ensure that 2018 was successful, we were, and that 2020 will continue to be successful. We take seriously the threat of election interference from every country, Russia included.
But I guess what I'm asking, and I take your point, because in terms of specific policies, the U.S. government...
So, Chris, I don't get your point.
Well,
I'm confused.
Well,
I'm confused.
Let me make it.
You're looking at the administration that has been tougher on Russia than any of its predecessors, and yet you continue to be fixated on something that Robert Mueller wrote down. I struggle with that.
I'm not fixated about Robert Mueller. I'm fixated on the president's conversation with Vladimir Putin, and the fact that in a conversation he doesn't even mention meddling in 2020. And the question I'm asking, I think it's a legitimate one, a lot of people are asking it, sir, is why not?
I talk to leaders all the time. We cover a broad range of subjects. Sometimes conversations just aren't long enough to include every issue that might be brought up. I'll let the White House talk to what the president actually said in the set of remarks, but no one should misunderstand from your question today. Your viewers should not be misled. This administration has taken seriously the threat of election interference and will continue to do so.
Yesterday, North Korea fired...
I don't know. Do you think this administration is taking seriously the threat of election interference when you saw Bill Barr testify in the Judiciary Committee in the Senate saying that he wasn't sure if it was wrong to take foreign stolen material as help in an election, and there were all sorts of things that, when Trump didn't actually threaten to fire Bob Mueller, he wanted to have him removed for conflict, even though he had no conflict and his bases for conflict were bogus, but he didn't want to fire him, he wanted to have him removed, which is totally different, and that's why there's no obstruction of justice and whatever. I almost, I talked last week about covering the Bill Barr testimony as the beginning of the impeachment hearings, but I was speaking more about his testimony to the House, which he ended up not showing up for, where they were going to cross-examine him with an attorney who could talk to him for like 30 minutes straight so he couldn't filibuster like he did. Well, anyway, I didn't want to go off onto a big digression about Bill Barr's testimony, but I think I already pre-criticized that Fox News interview with, or interview questioning of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The next clip is also a Fox News clip where I think Chris Wallace's bias is also coming across when he talks to a Democrat representative, Mike Cicilline, talking about whether Bill Barr lied, and you'll see Chris Wallace seems incredulous that Nancy Pelosi would say he lied. And then Mike Cicilline gives him this whole answer about the subpoena power, and also talking about the inherent power of the House to jail people without even this is the clip I was talking about, where they actually have a jail in the House, in the Congress building, where they can send out the sergeant at arms, and the Supreme Court has upheld their ability to jail people who don't comply with their subpoenas. Although he's talking about subpoenas and not lying to Congress, so it's like a non-responsive answer that Chris Wallace kind of glosses over in this clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it over here.
If I might ask you another question, sir, just to follow up. The question now is, what is the House going to do about all this? Here is what Attorney General Barr said when he testified before Congress last month.
Reports have emerged recently, General, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter. Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't. I suspect that they probably wanted, more put out.
But after we learned this week that, in fact, Special Counsel Robert Mueller had written long before that testimony, just after the release of the Attorney General's summary, to Barr complaining about his summary, here was the reaction from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
He lied to Congress. He lied to Congress. If anybody else did that, it would be considered a crime.
You are on the record as saying the House should be prepared to imprison people held in contempt of Congress. Are you really serious that you're going to go down and arrest the Attorney General?
Well, what I'm serious about, Chris, is the Congress has the absolute responsibility to collect evidence, to compel the presence of witnesses to testify under oath. If the executive branch can prevent us from doing that, they will have effectively extinguished our oversight function. So we have to take this in a deadly serious way. We have several ways to enforce a subpoena. The first is to adjudge someone in contempt and to initiate a civil proceeding. Congress also has the inherent authority to judge people in contempt, and there is both an 1821 and a 1935 Supreme Court decision that recognizes Congress's right to do that. And in both those cases, individuals were taken into custody pending their compliance with the subpoena. It, of course, should never come to that. We expect the Attorney General to honor a subpoena when properly served, and we will fully enforce that through the courts. But the reality is we have to have access to this information. This is central to our oversight responsibilities, and it is not up to the executive branch to decide what they want to give us. Our Constitution requires otherwise.
I got a couple of final questions. There have been new reports this week.
So I think you could see sort of from Chris Wallace's questioning there, like I said, that he seemed kind of incredulous that they would claim that Bill Barr lied, although he never really showed the previous answers that Bill Barr gave to Charlie Crist and Chris Van Hollen that I'll be showing in just a minute. But before I get to that, I want to show one more example of the Fox News bias, just in case that was a little too subtle for you. Here is the teaser where at the end of the Representative Mike Cicilline interview, where Chris Wallace does a teaser for the upcoming panel discussion, and the question is, maybe there's a real reason the Democrats are going after Attorney General William Barr, having nothing to do with the fact that he blatantly lied about this letter from Bob Mueller on March 27th. And then also, of course, asking for viewer questions. And you'll never guess whose side the viewer question ends up benefiting. Is it a pro-Trump question? I think it's going to. But anyway, here's the end of that segment, the teaser from Chris Wallace at the end of the Mike Cicilline interview over here.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss why Democrats are suddenly targeting Attorney General Barr. Are they afraid of what he'll discover about the Trump-Russia investigation? Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about President Trump's decision to ignore House subpoenas? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday and we may use your question on the air.
So that may seem kind of balanced, because first they talk about, the real reason being the oranges of the Mueller investigation, which is, the conspiracy against Trump by the Obama deep state that was their insurance policy and all that stuff that apparently is going to come out in sometime this month in the Inspector General report on the oranges or the origins of the Mueller investigation. But you might think that was balanced, that whole Fox News pro-Trump spin with, but viewers can ask us what they think about Trump's decision not to comply with subpoenas. So maybe that is critical of Trump. But of course, the viewer question they used, I'm not going to show you the whole segment, but how many subpoenas did Obama and Clinton ignore? So that viewer question ended up somehow being pro-Trump spin as well. Now, the next clip I want to show is the one clip from CBS's Face the Nation, where Margaret Brennan asked the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin, about this question of Bill Barr lying to the Senate. And kudos here to Face the Nation for actually showing both the Charlie Crist clip and the Chris Van Hollen clip that Bill Barr was definitely misleading, which you'll see Dick Durbin says here. Whether it's, the crime of lying to Congress, that requires a lot more guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But he's definitely lying, which is why I said that Barr lies and Trump denies in the title of this video. And Dick Durbin makes it pretty clear in the 2.5-minute CBS Face the Nation clip over here.
To the question of Russian election interference in this country's election in 2016, which is, of course, what prompted the Mueller report and brings us to where we are right now with the Attorney General testifying to Congress about his description of that to the public. Speaker Pelosi said this week that AG Barr lied. Do you agree with her?
Well, I don't know what other conclusion you can reach. I asked him the question point blank, and Charlie Crist of Florida asked him, well, is there any effort by the people who worked on the Mueller staff and such to raise questions about the accuracy of what you said in your letter? And he said, no, I don't know. And the fact is, he'd received a letter from Bob Mueller just a few days before that explicitly said in writing the concerns which he had with the characterizations by Attorney General Barr. I don't know any other way to characterize it.
Let's listen to that exchange that you just referenced.
Reports have emerged recently, General, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter, that it does not adequately or accurately necessarily portray the report's findings. Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't. I suspect that they probably wanted, more put out.
Did Bob Mueller support your conclusion?
I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion.
That was Congressman Crist, and then Senator Van Hollen. Those questions that you are saying you view as a lie. Republicans, defenders of Attorney General Barr, say, no, this was a matter of answering the question regarding members of Mueller's own team disagreeing, not saying that he was not aware that the special counsel personally objected. Why don't you buy that excuse?
I don't buy it at all. Let's be honest about it. Attorney General Barr not only received that letter from Bob Mueller saying in writing that he disagreed with the Attorney General's characterization of the Mueller report, he then had a telephone conversation with him to follow, and to say he wasn't aware of Mueller's misgivings about his characterization, that is at the minimum misleading, if not worse, deception to the American people.
Now, you did have a chance to ask some questions.
Misleading, deception to the American people, not necessarily the crime of lying to Congress. I don't know. What do you think? Does the amount of misleading rise to the level of lying to Congress, which is a crime, which means that the House should impeach the Attorney General? They can impeach the Attorney General just as much as they can impeach the President. which is why I almost titled my video this week "Impeach Barr, Trump?" rather than "Barr lies, Trump denies." I think I've just in that last clip with the clips from Representative Charlie Crist and Senator Chris Van Hollen asking questions of Mueller before this whole, asking questions of Attorney General William Barr about the Mueller team and their misgivings about his 4-page summary. It's pretty clear that William Barr misled the Congress about this March 27th Bob Mueller letter saying the 4-page summary is leading to misconceptions about the context and content and basically everything about the Mueller report. And so definitely lying, whether it's the crime of lying to Congress, that would lead to impeachment. And you'll see in this next clip Senator Cory Booker talking to Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union is basically saying what you heard from Dick Durbin. It seems like they have their talking points, that it's misleading and he should resign, not lying to Congress, and he should be impeached, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Judiciary. The Attorney General Bill Barr testified before your committee. Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that he lied to Congress. Do you agree?
I think that if you, number one, have seen the conduct of an attorney general, he has eroded his credibility to the point where I believe he should resign. He has clearly misled Congress.
Should he be impeached?
I believe right now he should resign. I think everything should be on the table at the end of the day. But if you have a person that has undermined the urgent independence of the Attorney General's office, who's a guy who's literally overseeing ongoing investigations into criminal activity in this president, and you lost your ability to trust, you clearly were trying to spin, you were acting more like Rudy Giuliani than the independent Attorney General of this country, I'm definitely worried. And then when you read a report, which is a testimony to deceit, which literally shows a campaign that had multiple dozens and dozens of contacts with a foreign adversary, doing things like sharing polling information that if any of my colleagues who were running for president did that with their own with a super PAC, would be considered illegal here.
We'll have more.
So yeah, that whole polling data that would be illegal if given to a super PAC, that's kind of what Cory Booker spent a lot of his questioning of Bill Barr in the Senate Judiciary Committee this last week on, and his questioning wasn't quite as effective as Kamala Harris's questioning on whether whether the Trump administration, anyone in the White House, Trump or anyone else in the White House, had asked him to prosecute anyone. And then Senator Dick Blumenthal also had some good questioning about some of Bill Barr's his lying regarding the Mueller letter, contradicting what he told other members of Congress. So there was some good questioning, even though Bill Barr didn't show up to the House committee that I was hoping for. But it seems like most of the Republicans are still sticking with the talking points and supporting Donald Trump and William Barr, and the Mueller, sticking with the spin on the Mueller report that there are no indictments, even though Bob Mueller didn't indict on obstruction of justice because basically he couldn't. And he made that pretty clear. But that's the second to last clip I want to show here before I get to the Bernie Sanders clip is one more Republican. I don't know. Louisiana isn't really a purple state. Sometimes they do have Democrats elected statewide, but it's still a fairly red state. And this is Senator John Kennedy, not of the John F. Kennedy family. This is a whole other. This is the Republican Kennedy version, where he likes to say certain inflammatory things. There's something like hair on a biscuit. I don't know, hair on a biscuit. Anyone heard the expression hair on a biscuit? look for hair on a biscuit in the middle of this fairly weak but I guess convincing for the Trump base argument in support of Donald Trump's lack of indictment from Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, talking to Chuck Todd on Meet the Press this morning over here.
Let me move to the hearing itself. After the hearing, you and I talked about calling up Bob Mueller to testify. You were open to it. Senator Graham had said no. Then he sent this letter to Bob Mueller. Should this be interpreted as an invitation to Bob Mueller to come testify before your committee?
Yes, and let me put this in context. I've been very supportive of the Mueller investigation. Never met the man, but by all accounts, he's a good, competent, decent man. We have his report. You can debate the rhetoric or the discussion in it, or the spin or whatever you want to call it. But the conclusion is no indictment for collusion, no indictment for conspiracy, no indictment for obstruction of justice. Now, I think many of my Democratic friends have accepted that. Some haven't. Many of my Democratic friends thought that Mueller was going to indict the president. And so the Mueller report was kind of like a hair on their biscuit. And now they don't know what to do, so they're attacking Bill Barr. And my feeling about it is it's time to move on. I understand that Washington is not the big rock candy mountain and that politics is in everybody's blood. But I think we ought to spend a little bit of our time talking about the next generation as opposed to the next election. If I could make one other point, this business of the dispute between the White House and the House is dangerous to America's institutions. Because if they all go to court, they need to work it out. If they all go to court and it becomes a zero-sum game, one or two things are going to happen. Trump's going to win, and that's going to undermine Congress's oversight ability, or Congress is going to win, the House is going to win, and then all of a sudden the new standard is that the House or the Senate can ask a president or a presidential nominee anything they want to about their personal life, whether it's relevant to being president or not.
So what's the compromise?
I think that's a dangerous precedent.
So what's the compromise? Should the White House cooperate more?
Well, I think the White House and the House leadership ought to sit down and say, okay, you want this, we'll give you that. Why do you want this? I don't think the House is in completely good faith. Let me give you an example. When the Ways and Means chairman said he wanted Trump's tax returns, he said the reason I want his returns is because it'll help me evaluate how good a job the IRS is doing in auditing. Now, give me a break, Chuck. I mean, if you believe that, you'll never own your own home. Nobody believes that. I mean, he's in total bad faith. The president doesn't have to turn over his tax returns. Would I do it if I were running for president? Yeah, but there's no law that says he has to.
Let me go on to...
And there was no real follow-up from Chuck Todd there with that whole nonsensical argument there at the end. There were a couple nonsensical arguments, but that one at the end was, you'll never own your own home if you don't understand that it's partisan for the House Ways and Means Committee to, even though there's a statute that says that they can request the tax return of any taxpayer, and their rationale for asking for President Trump's tax returns is to see if the IRS is doing an adequate job of auditing presidential candidates and presidents, because Trump claims that he's under audit. And you notice Senator John Kennedy there conveniently left out the rationale that, you know, they want to see if the IRS is doing a good job of auditing, not auditing presidents and presidential candidates, which was the actual rationale, which makes a lot of sense given that Trump said he couldn't give out his tax returns because he was under audit, and presidents are usually, by tradition, audited every year by the IRS. And so by looking at the tax returns, the Congress can see is the IRS doing a good job of finding any financial misdoings in Trump's tax returns, because there's a lot of suspicion that he's not giving out those tax returns because there's dirt in there. So that was a totally nonsensical argument. And then there was that whole nonsensical argument that if Trump complies with subpoenas and lets like Don McGahn testify, who's already testified for 30 hours to Mueller, or now Mueller himself. Trump, since the news programs this morning, Trump has tweeted something about how Mueller shouldn't testify, Democrats shouldn't get like a second chance or get to start over. I don't remember the exact tweet, but that's sort of breaking news. So I don't know why John Kennedy says that there was sort of a nonsensical argument that if the Trump administration complies with any of this investigation, then it's like a slippery slope to ask me anything about my entire personal life, or presidential candidates have to like open up their entire personal life. That was kind of a joke of an argument. But anyway, that was the last clip on my main topic of Barr lies and Trump denies. I think I showed enough clips there that supported the allegations against both Barr and Trump that I made in my title. But I did promise one Bernie Sanders clip talking about the real issue of corporate greed, and then the ancillary issue of democratic socialism. This is the exclusive interview on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Jonathan Karl first does a fairly fawning introduction. I don't think they call him a progressive rock star here, but they talk about how he went from being a long shot to being like a real force in the 2020 Democratic primary. And here you'll see no talk about impeachment or William Barr. It's just all the issues that Bernie Sanders relates to corporate greed, and then his sort of vague description of democratic socialism that I will discuss with you after we watch that final news clip before my, of course, obligatory bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end. But here's the Jonathan Karl interview with first fawning introduction, then T-ball or softball question to Bernie Sanders. They don't even show the question. They just let Bernie Sanders start talking about all the issues related to corporate greed, then edited together with a question about democratic socialism, and I'll discuss all of that with you after we watch that final news clip together over here.
Thank you.
I love you.
I guess it's safe to say name recognition is not a problem anymore. I don't think so. Okay. Thank you very much.
Big crowds for Bernie Sanders in Iowa this weekend. When Sanders jumped into the last presidential campaign 4 years ago, he was the longest of long shots. By the end of that campaign, he was the leader of a national progressive movement that nearly toppled Hillary Clinton. Now Bernie Sanders is picking up right where he left off. He's on a first-name basis with Iowa Democrats, and this weekend the one-time long shot looked like a frontrunner. We caught up with him just outside the big farmers market in Des Moines. I started off by asking him about the issues he believes will animate this race.
I think there is a profound anger at corporate greed. Pharmaceutical companies make billions in profits, and 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford the medicine they need. Insurance companies pay their CEOs outrageous levels of compensation. You got 34 million people who have no health insurance. Many people cannot afford their deductibles and their co-payments when they go to the doctor. Fossil fuel industry makes billions of profits while they destroy the planet. Wall Street makes profits, and they're charging people 17% interest rates on their credit cards. I think people see the rich getting much, much richer, and the level of income and wealth inequality increasingly dangerous from a moral perspective and from an economic perspective. Trump seems to want to run against you, and certainly he wants to run, and Republicans want to run against socialism. Okay. Is it time for you to disavow that label? The problem is that on a television interview, it's hard for me to describe in depth what we mean by that. When Social Security was created, what did the Republicans call it? Called socialism. Anytime you do things for the people and you stand up to the wealthy and powerful, you'll be labeled this, that, and the other thing. But this isn't a label you embrace. Yeah, but all of the issues that we are talking about, these are ideas that in one form or another are in fact supported by the American people.
So that's the final clip, and you saw Bernie Sanders there both talking about all the issues that he can relate to corporate greed, nothing about impeachment, nothing about the Mueller report. In fact, Jonathan Karl never asked him anything about impeachment or William Barr lying. That I don't know, in some ways you could think maybe ABC's This Week should have at least asked one question on that topic, but I think it's a good sort of foil or contrapoint or whatever you want to call it to the rest of the coverage on William Barr lying and Trump denying and the whole Mueller report continuing to be an ongoing issue with the Trump administration. And I don't think that's going to die as an issue anytime soon, but you can see there that Bernie Sanders has a lot of other issues that are more important to voters that he's focusing on. And even though a lot of Democratic primary voters like me think that the Mueller report needs more investigation and more focus, because the reason why it's so despicable that William Barr lied in his 4-page summary or spun his 4-page summary so much that Mueller wrote him letters making a written record of how dishonest he was being, and that didn't come out for almost a month, and through the whole Easter holiday it was like one of the great spin jobs of presidential history, and whether that spin can be unspun by the testimony of Robert Mueller on March 15th, which may or may not happen. And of course Don McGahn would have to be a big person to testify, and then what's the name of his secretary who took the notes that could be the smoking gun? I can't remember her name, but she could be also a really important witness that will bring back focus on, most people aren't going to read a 448-page Mueller report, especially when somehow the Justice Department put it out in unsearchable PDF format, and it's maybe slowly seeping into the culture. I guess we'll have to see. Maybe Saturday Night Live will be more political next week. I don't know. Maybe they'll have Alec Baldwin come back as Trump to deal with the real constitutional crisis that is slow-moving but real in this country, and at least in my opinion. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. And before I finish up the show, I do want to show the Dash and Sandy clip, which I'm also relating to the whole Democrats versus Trump constitutional conflict. It's like the Democrats are, you'll see Dash in this clip waiting outside the door to get into the room, and they think they're going to get in, but they get bulldozed by the Trump administration, represented by Sandy here, and have to wait, and then they finally get into the room at the end of the 16-second clip over here. So what do you think? Is Dash the Democrats, or is Sandy the Trump administration in that clip? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I don't mean to politicize the pets, but that's my interpretation of that clip. That's my interpretation of the Big Five corporate outlets with the clips I picked out, my commentary. I hope you appreciate it. If you want to support my continuing commentary and criticism of the Big Five corporate outlets every Sunday, you can give me a thumbs up. You can give me supportive comments down in the comment section, and there are other ways to support my channel down in the video description. I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future with my LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.